Looking at the subject of providence. The last few weeks we defined what providence means. We looked at general providence in a general way, and then we looked at special providence. Today we're going to talk about a story in the Bible that demonstrates and gives us a clear picture of what providence is. And it's the story of the life of Joseph. In Genesis 25:21, Isaac pleaded with the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord granted his plea, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. The blessings that were passed on to Isaac, he was old and almost blind. He pronounced his blessing for his sons. Rebekah helped Jacob deceive his father, and the blessing fell to Jacob. And in Genesis chapter 27, he receives the blessing from his father Isaac, and then he is sent away because his brother Esau is angry at him. And then he goes and he works for a man named Laban for 20 years, Jacob does. And during those 20 years, he is married to 4 different women, Leah, Rachel, and their handmaids. And due to those relationships, Jacob has 12 sons. And Leah had the first 6, Rachel had the last 2, and Belial and Zelphi, the maidservants of first Leah and then Rachel, both had 2 children. That's a total of 12 sons, and he also had a daughter, and her name was Dinah. So what we see here, these 12 sons of Jacob were going to become the 12 tribes of Israel. But our story centers on one of those sons, the second to the youngest son. And his name is Joseph. And Jacob dwelt in Canaan. And his son Joseph was at 17, and he was tending the sheep. And that was his job, to take care of the sheep. And Joseph was a dreamer. But not only did he dream, but he had the ability given by God to understand what those dreams meant. And Jacob loved Joseph more than his brothers and made him a coat of many colors that caused his brothers to be envious of him. And during this time, in Genesis 37, he has visions of the days to come. And in these visions, he sees the time when his brothers and his father will bow down to him and pay homage to him. And this is in the form of sheaves that are surrounding Joseph, and they're all bowing down to him. And again, this makes his brothers angry because of the love that their father showers on him, and also because of his dreams. And so they treat him with contempt. And then the brothers were in Shechem, and they were tending to their chores, and their father sends Joseph to check on them. And when he comes to check on their well-being, they conspire against him, and they wanted to kill him. But Reuben stops them from killing him. He intercedes on their behalf, and they throw him into a pit. And while Reuben is away, the brothers decide, why should they kill their brother? Why shouldn't they just get gain? And so they sell him as a slave to the Ishmaelites. And later, he was sold to the Mennonites and then to Potiphar in Egypt. Now, Reuben is very upset with his brothers because they have sold their brother into slavery, and what are they going to tell their father, who loves the boy greatly? And so they dip Joseph's coat in goat's blood, and then they present it to Jacob. And Jacob knows that it's his son's coat, and he sees that it's been torn and it's filled with blood, and Jacob assumed that Joseph was dead and was killed by an animal, and mourns his death and greatly grieves for his son in Genesis chapter 37, verse 29 and 35. So now in our story, we have the second youngest son. He's now a slave, first to the Ishmaelites, then to the Egyptians, and he's going to be in Egypt. Now, Potiphar was a captain in Egypt's and Pharaoh's army, and he was a very prosperous man. But he soon learned that Joseph and everything he did went well, and he was very trustworthy. And so he turned over all of his house and all of his daily duties and all of the responsibility of his house to Joseph to let him be the manager and the steward and the caretaker of it. But Joseph became an overseer in Potiphar's house and was very respected and was very successful. Potiphar's wife also noticed Joseph and noticed that he was a good-looking young man and very handsome, and she tried on numerous occasions to seduce him and to try to get him to commit adultery. But in every case, he rejected her and would not succumb to her advances. And then one day, he is in the house, and it's just him and her, and she grabs him by the garment and asks him to lie with her. And he says he cannot do this sin, first of all, against God, in Genesis 38 and verse 8. And then he can't do this sin against Potiphar. So he is unwilling. She tries to force him, and he runs and leaves his garment in her hand. Well, she waits till her husband comes home, and then she falsely accuses Joseph, and he's thrown into prison. She falsely accused him of trying to force himself on her, and Potiphar, in his anger, throws him into prison. And now he's in the king's prison in Genesis chapter 39. Now, the Lord was with Joseph and blessed him wherever he went. When he was with the Ishmaelites, he was blessed. When he was with the Egyptians, and when he was with Potiphar, he's blessed. And now he's in prison, and he's being blessed again. Joseph is given the charge of the other prisoners. The chief gatekeeper sees that everything that Joseph does goes well, and so he builds a trust and a camaraderie with the gatekeeper, and now he's in control, and he has watch over all the other prisoners. Well, one day the king's butler and the baker are thrown into prison because of displeasure of their master, and while they're in prison they have dreams, both the butler and the baker. And they're very troubled, and he comes in the next day and he sees that they're not sick, but they're troubled, and he asks them why. And they said, well, we've had these dreams and we don't understand them. And so he tells them the God that he serves will give him the meaning, tell him the dreams. And so he tells the meaning of the dreams to the baker and to the butler. And he asked the butler and the baker to remember him. And in these dreams, the butler, he predicts, will once again take the grapes, and he will squeeze them into the cup of Pharaoh and be his cupbearer again. But the baker, in 3 days, he's going to be taken out of prison, he's going to be hung, and the birds will eat his flesh. And sure enough, at the end of 3 days, this indeed happens. The butler is redeemed and is taken again into Pharaoh's company. He is blessed, and he goes and becomes the king's cupbearer again, but the baker is taken out and he's hung. And so remember, he asked the butler and the baker to remember him because he was innocent of being in prison because he had done nothing wrong. Well, the butler forgets for 2 more years. For 2 more years he remains languished in prison because the butler forgot to tell Pharaoh. Well, from prisoner to prime minister. And then we see Pharaoh had some dreams, and none of his counselors, none of his wise people, and none of the people that he had around him could explain the dreams to him and could explain what the dreams meant. And so all of a sudden his counselors could not help him. And the butler now gets his memory back. And now he remembers Joseph, and he tells Pharaoh, there is a man, or you have me in prison, that I had a dream, and he correctly interpreted my dream, and I forgot about it till just now, and I'm sure he can interpret your dreams. And so they clean him up, cut his hair, bring him before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, I've been told that you have the ability to understand riddles, enigmas, and visions and dreams. And Joseph tells Pharaoh, I don't have that ability, but the God I serve does, and I will tell you the dream and the meaning of the dream. And so God revealed the meaning of the dream to Joseph, and he revealed it unto Pharaoh. The 2 dreams were really one. And the 2 dreams that he had was that there was going to be 7 years that there was going to be a great famine. Or excuse me, there'll be a great harvest. And there would be for 7 years that land is going to overproduce. And there's going to be a great surplus of grain. But following that 7 years is going to be a 7-year of famine. That's going to affect the whole world. And so these two dreams are really one. God is revealing to Pharaoh what's going to happen in the future, that there's going to be 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. And so he reveals correctly the dream and the meaning of the dream to the Pharaoh. Well, he needed to choose a man to gather the grain in order that he might take care of it, so there would be grain for when the 7 years of famine came. And so he advised Pharaoh to choose a wise person to gather the grain, to put it in the king's storehouses and Pharaoh's storehouses, and then when there's no food in the land because of the famine, then everybody will have to come to Egypt in order to buy food. His people and other nations will come to him, and he'll be able to sell food, and therefore he'll become very wealthy. Well, they need to choose a man to do that. Well, Pharaoh decides that there's nobody better to do that than Joseph. And so he elevates him to second in power in all of Egypt. And he gives him the commission to go out and gather the grain during the 7 years of plenty. And Joseph is made second in command over all of Egypt. Now, remember this, here he was, second youngest son of Jacob, thrown into slavery, first by the Ishmaelites, then by Potiphar, then falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, thrown into prison, languished for 2 years, and now, because he'd been faithful to God and kept his commitment to God, now he is placed in a position of authority in Egypt, the second in command. He is also given the daughter of priest of On in order to have a wife, and he is now 30 years old at the end of Genesis chapter 41. Now, in the passage of time, he gathers the grain for the 7 years. Then the 7 years of famine come. And down in Canaan, the Canaanites, and where his father and brother are at, his brothers and father, they need to have food because they've run out of food. So they know that there's still grain in Egypt, and now it's feeding the world. So Jacob sends the brothers down to get the grain. But he remains, he tells them to leave Benjamin there, that's Joseph's full brother, in case something might happen to him, because he's already lost Joseph. And so Benjamin remains back, and the other 10 brothers go to Egypt. The famine was in Canaan, and Jacob sends his sons to Egypt. His brothers stood before Joseph. He recognized them, but they did not recognize him, and they bowed down before him. Now you remember, earlier in Genesis 37, he had that dream and that vision that the sheaves were all bowing down to him, and now this dream has come to fruition, and these brothers are bowing down before Joseph. Now, they don't know it's Joseph, but Joseph knows that it's them. Now, he can act in a way to gain vengeance on them, but he doesn't do that. But he does accuse them of being spies. He accused them of coming to spy out the land, and they keep insisting to him that they're not spies, and then he begins to question them. And they were kept in prison for 3 days. They were told by the brothers that they were the son of one man, and that they had another brother and another brother who had been died, and they're all 12 sons of one man, and that they were honorable men. And so they're kept in prison for 3 days. Now Reuben, he understands that in his mind that they're being paid back for the evil that they had done to Joseph, and now God is punishing them. Well, that's not exactly true, but Joseph says, he tells them that he'll believe them if they go back and bring their younger brother back to Egypt. You see, he wants to see Benjamin, that's his full brother. So he tells his men to give them food for the journey, and then he tells them to put the money back in their sacks that they had paid for the grain to take for their family back to Canaan. And so when they stop to feed their animals, they find their money in their packs, and they're afraid because they know they paid for the grain when they were there, but now it's in their sack, so they're greatly afraid. And so the guilt hits them. The guilt hits them that now they're being punished because of the evil that they had done to Joseph. And so they left Simeon. Simeon stays behind, and the other 9 go back to Egypt to get Benjamin. Joseph is testing his brothers. He's finding out if they have changed any from the ones that had sold him into slavery. And he returned their money. And so now they go back to Canaan to their father. And the famine continues. When he comes back, they tell Jacob what happened, and Jacob won't let him take Benjamin back because he's afraid that something will happen to him. And so he doesn't send them back. Well, time goes on, the famine continues, and they run out of grain again. And so they've got to go back, but Judah reminds them they can't go back without Benjamin, or the man said that he would deal harshly with them. And Simeon's still back there. And so Judah steps forward and promises to bring Benjamin back, and if not, he can take it out on the posterity of Judah. But he promises his father he'll stay back, he won't let anything happen to Benjamin. And so he's ordered, so he gives them Benjamin, and they go back. When they go back to get the grain, they're ordered to be taken to Joseph's house. And so Joseph has his brothers gathered at his home in Egypt. And the money is returned again, and Simeon is released from prison. The brothers give the money back, even double it. They give the money back that was taken from them, and Joseph tells them to keep it. And Simeon is released from prison. And he asks about their father's health. Was the old man still doing well? Again, they think he's just inquiring about their father, but he's inquiring about his father in Genesis 43. Now, Joseph orders a meal to be served. And the brothers are seated at the meal according to their ages, the oldest down to the youngest. And Benjamin, he receives 5 times the amount than the other brothers. The brothers are astonished that they're set in order of their ages. That doesn't give them a clue, but they're amazed by that. Now, when they get ready to go back to Egypt, when they go back to Canaan, he tells his servants to put his silver cup in Benjamin's pack. And so a silver cup is placed in Benjamin's pack. And now he follows, they go out of Egypt to go back to Canaan. Joseph sends his men after them and accuses them of stealing from him. And the brothers say, if we've taken anything, they will become your slaves, and let the man who took it become, and you do with him what you will. And so they opened all the packs, and the cup was found in Benjamin. Now they're about to be beside themselves, but Judah pleads with Joseph to not take him, but to take Judah, that he would take Benjamin's place, but not to send them back to their father without Benjamin. Now, this greatly moves Joseph. He sees that his brothers have changed part of their character, and so he reveals his identities to his brothers. And the brothers are greatly troubled by his presence. Here's their brother that they sold into slavery. Here's their brother they told their father he was dead, and now he's in this position of authority, and they're greatly troubled by that. Now, he tells them to go back to Canaan, to get their father, to get their families, to come back to Egypt. He will put them up in the best place in the land, and he will take care of them. And so he sends back wagons with grain and wagons for the travel, and Joseph told his brothers to bring Jacob to Egypt. They return home with the wagons and supplies, and the news that Joseph is not dead, but now he is in second in command in all of Egypt. They stop at Beersheba to offer sacrifices on the way back to Egypt. He meets Joseph in the land of Goshen. Here's a father and son who the father has thought that he's been dead for over 17 years, and now he sees him face to face. And he brings 70 souls with him when he comes to Egypt from Canaan. And so all of his family and those with him, there are 70 souls, and all of them come to Egypt, and they will rest in the land of Goshen. the best land in Egypt. Jacob and the party are given the land of Goshen. Jacob blesses Pharaoh. He goes to Pharaoh and he blesses him. Egypt prospers and gains more land. Jacob lived for an additional 17 years after they come back to Egypt. After they come to Egypt, he lived 17 years. Joseph takes him back to Canaan to bury him in the cave of Malpah, takes him back, and Joseph assures his brothers that he will not seek vengeance. You see, after his father dies, they think that he's going to enact vengeance. I want to read you a statement made by Joseph when they are concerned that now that Jacob has died, whose name has been changed to Israel, now that he will take vengeance. And then verse 15 of chapter 50 says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to him. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, before your father died, he commanded, saying, thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of God, of your father. And Joseph wept as they spoke to him. Then the brothers also fell down before his face, and they said, behold, we are your servants. Joseph said to them, do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? For as for you, you meant it evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order that I might bring about this day to save many people alive. Now therefore do not be afraid, I will provide for you and your little ones. And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Notice, Joseph says he's not going to seek vengeance. He's not God. He's not going to take the matters into his own hand. He'll let God deal with them. But he's going to take care of them and treat them kindly and take care of their family. Again, this shows the character of Joseph. Now, this is the divine chain of providence, and this is why we use the story of Joseph. How God took Abraham's descendants into Egypt. How did they get there? He's going to call them out of Egypt, but how did they get there? They get there through God's providence. Although his name is not mentioned, we see God with Joseph every step of the way, because Joseph remained faithful to God. Jacob and his family were comfortably settled in the land of Goshen. How is Joseph in a position to care for them? Because through God's providence, he rises in power, because he remains committed and obedient to God. He does the right thing, even when he's treated in a harsh way, even when he's dealt with unkindly by his brothers. He doesn't allow that to make him bitter. He remains faithful and true to God. He keeps his character, his integrity, and even when he's thrown into prison, wrongfully accused, he doesn't become bitter. He doesn't become angry. He remains faithful and true to God, knowing that God will reward him. And indeed he does. And that's how he rises into power. How did Joseph get to be prime minister? Why was he appointed in such a position? How did Pharaoh learn that Joseph was a man of God? How did Joseph happen to be in a position to interpret Pharaoh's dreams? Well, think about it. How did he get to be prime minister? Well, he was in prison, and Pharaoh had dreams that were sent to him by God, but he had no meaning. Number two, why was he appointed to such a position? Because he could favorably tell the Pharaoh what those dreams were and what those dreams meant. Number three, how did Pharaoh learn that Joseph was a man of God? Because of the butler. The butler was thrown in prison by Pharaoh. And Joseph revealed and interpreted the butler's dream, and now he knows about Joseph, and he passes that on to Pharaoh. Then, how did Joseph happen to be in a position to interpret Pharaoh's dream? Because he had been in prison, because he interpreted the butler's dream. You see, God's name is not mentioned, but all along the way, God is providing for Joseph because he is remaining true and faithful to God in his character and integrity, and he's not becoming bitter. How did Pharaoh even know about Joseph? Because of the butler. How was the butler in a position to have such knowledge? Because he was in the prison where he was. Where had the butler met Joseph? In prison. In the first place, why was Joseph even in that prison? Because he was faithful to God. He would not commit adultery. He would not allow Potiphar's wife to seduce him. Why? Because he did what was right. He did what was honorable. Therefore, he ended up in prison. That was a bad thing, but it turned out to be a good thing because of what it would later lead to. But why was Joseph even in prison? Because he was true to what he knew to be right. How could Potiphar make such an accusation against Joseph? Because he was angry, and because he didn't find out the facts. He believed his wife. How did Joseph happen to be over Potiphar's house? Because he showed himself to be faithful in all of his doings. How did he become Potiphar's property? Because the Ishmaelites sold him to him. How did the Ishmaelites come to own him? Because his brothers, who were trying to get rid of him, sold him to the Ishmaelites in Genesis 37. Why did Joseph's brothers want to sell him into slavery? Because they envied him and because of the love that their father had for him. Why did they hate him so much? Because his father favored him. Why did Jacob have a special love for Joseph? Because he was the son of his favorite wife, Rebekah, and the son of his old age. How did Jacob come to love Rachel? That was the first woman that he saw, and that's the one he worked with for 14 years. Why did Jacob go to Laban's house? Because he was sent there by Rebekah when he stole the birthright, when he stole the blessing from Isaac. He was sent there to flee the wrath of Esau. Why would Esau want to kill his brother? Because he stole his blessing. Why would Isaac want the blessing to go to Esau in spite of what God had predicted at his birth? He didn't need Rebekah's help. God had already said that the older was going to serve the younger. That had been determined at their birth. Why the partiality? Because Jacob, Israel, made a mistake. It's an amazing chain of events. Only twice did God give Joseph miraculous involvement. The only miraculous involvement that God did is giving the dreams to Pharaoh and his ability to interpret the butler's dreams. Other than those two things, God did nothing to intervene to help Joseph. Joseph helped himself because he remained faithful to God. That's how providence works. God works behind the scenes. Man has free will. He makes the decisions. God allows those decisions to work in a way that brings about his will. What was his will in this situation? To bring his people into Egypt. For what reason? Because later he is going to bring them out, and bring them out by a mighty hand to give them the land that he promised to Abraham. That's divine providence in action. And the story of Joseph is one of the best examples of how God's providence works.